Hello, today I'd like to detour slightly from the current series I'm working on, which is the History of Tekken series, and talk about another fighting game that my friend mentioned to me yesterday, and I've mentioned it before on here that I wanted to do a video about it, and I simply just haven't found the time, but I really just have this urge to talk about Bushido Blade, which is a 1997 fighting game by Squaresoft. Now, Bushido Blade is an absolutely fascinating game, and it's one that's largely been forgotten, which surprises me and it kind of disappoints me a bit actually. Not that it was ever going to compete with the behemoths that were out, in '97, such as Street Fighter was extremely popular around this time. Tekken 2 had come out, so the fighting genre was very competitive around this time, and it was unlikely that a small standalone title like Bushido Blade was going to compete with that. But I feel that it occupies a really nice little niche in the history of video games, and I haven't actually played a video game like Bushido Blade before or since, and I'm sure a lot of people also feel that way. So yeah, before I get into the discussion proper, I think it's really important to actually understand the context and the innovations that Bushido Blade actually introduced to the fighting genre, and how ahead of its time that it actually was. Today it's almost a given. Every new video game title that comes out is pushing towards and largely achieving realism in terms of, aesthetics and, graphics. So, for example, we have developers accurately rendering a human character right down to the pores of the skin. I'm sure we've all been seeing the PlayStation 4 demos, and, the realisation aesthetically is absolutely fantastic. But back in 1997, Bushido Blade actually succeeded bringing a reality of gameplay to the fore, which many have been reluctant to try before or since, and I haven't played a game like Bushido Blade with such commitment to authenticity, ever. I haven't played a game like Bushido Blade ever, so I think it's really important to kind of celebrate and, kind of acknowledge these innovations that it brought to the fore. So I'll move swiftly into the aspects that set Bushido Blade apart. And first I'd like to talk about the setting, because this is, instantly the most evident thing that kind of sets it apart from video games of the time. So where you have larger titles that were pretty much constrained to the formulaic, layout of the fighting genre, such as, you're operating on pretty much on a 2D plane, and on a one-on-one, a one-to-one approach, which kind of fills the screen. Your characters and the health bar kind of fill the screen, and that's what you engage with. Bushido Blade being an original title and not really having any obligation to maintain or follow these conventions, really had the freedom to get creative and introduce something a little bit different. So what we have in this game is a series of large 3D landscapes and environments that you can interact with, and rather than facing your opponent one-on-one, such as in Tekken or Street Fighter in that relatively cramped screen, you can actually run around, interact with the geography and utilise the environment to your advantage. For example, there's certain sections where you can kick sand or mud in your opponent's face, or you can climb up to higher ground, where obviously you have a tactical advantage and can slash at their hands and face when they try and climb up to meet you. So, it's just really fantastic, and free roaming. It's kind of an early free roamer in a lot of ways. You can run all over the place and basically use an unprecedented number of tactics to win the bout. There are also these kind of cute little additions that were put in purely for aesthetic and realistic purposes. So, for example, you can go to a bamboo grove and cut down all the trees, and I personally found that really great, and I'd spend ages doing it. And there's kind of boggy areas where if you get knocked down, you can cover your character head to toe in mud and fight totally caked in mud in these boggy areas. So this all sounds like a given. There are games where you kind of can get tarnished by the environment and kind of aspects of the environment and rain and things like that these days. But in 1997, this is absolutely amazing, and in terms of a fighting game as well, it's just not something that we'd really seen before at all. Moving swiftly into the actual combat system, which is one of the primary aspects of Bushido Blade. You have the character selection screen, and then you move on to the weapon selection screen. So weapons actually demand the same precedence and govern a lot of the gameplay elements that you have. And yeah, I mean the introduction of weapons was really quite innovative in terms of aesthetics and gameplay. but it also increases the recurring playability, as you can give any weapon to any respective character, and each character handles differently with each weapon. So, you know, the ability to kind of go back and, you know, it adds to the longevity of the game. You can go back and play this, you know, over and over again, which, combined with obviously the aforementioned environment and the free roaming nature of that, really makes Bushido Blade enduring in terms of playability. Now, in terms of the weapons themselves, there is a degree of authenticity and historical context offered in terms of the weapons. You know, each of them comes from, you know, most prominently Japanese, but also you have Chinese and European weapons in there, and they're all from the same context, so Edo period Japan, or Edo period, however you pronounce that. And, you know, the European weapons seem to be from around, you know, the days of empire, so, you know, the Hanover dynasty, I suppose, in British terms. So, you know, there's a commitment to authenticity in terms of the weapons themselves, which is kind of funny. I mean, it's cool, but it's also funny because where the game itself concerns, you know, assassins and ninjas and things, it seems very odd that a lot of the actual environments kind of, they blend traditional Japan with contemporary society, in that there's metal fences, and I can remember one instance where there's actually a boss fight on top of a skyscraper, where he's kind of shooting a gun at you. So there's a bit of a convolution of time and place, but I personally don't feel that's of detriment to the plot or gameplay much. In fact, I think it adds to the novelty of Bushido Blade, and I find it really kind of amusing. Now, with these weapons being one of the biggest factors of the game, the actual gameplay and the way that you use them is probably the most significant aspect of the game. I mean, the title Bushido Blade is not just some cheap marketing technique employed to seduce Japanese samurai-obsessed teenage boys. It's actually, you know, kind of intrinsic to the gameplay and how the combat is managed within that. If you manage to kill your opponent, but you kill them from behind or in a way that's considered dishonourable by the standards of Bushido, you actually lose the bout. So this is both frustrating, but it's also intrinsic to the enjoyment of Bushido Blade, and you cannot just, you know, mash your way through the rounds by button bashing like you can in other fighting games. It adds this element of strategy and, by extension, again, longevity and enjoyment to the game, which is, you know, frankly, it's just great. And furthermore, this is my favourite aspect of the game, there are also no health or stat bars that govern your success or failure within the round. Your success or failure is governed by real-world mechanics of life and death. So, for example, if you get struck in the face or chest, you're dead, it's game over. If you're struck in the arm or leg, you're maimed and you can't continue. You can continue to fight, but you are, you know, essentially crippled and at a severe disadvantage. So, for me, this unprecedented method of gameplay, I just really can't believe the extent to which Bushido Blade has died off or been forgotten, you know, in response to this. I mean, admittedly, there is a sort of poverty of plot and character development, and you'll find when you're doing story mode with each character, they generally have, you know, the same storyline but tweaked very slightly. But nonetheless, you know, this is absolutely fantastic. It's a great game, and it's the likes of which should be celebrated and canonised as an early advance towards authentic gameplay in the field of video games.